Hey everyone, Joshua Kirk here with you once again. Now it's time for episode 185 of Album of the Day. Before we get into today's review, I want to talk about this shirt I'm wearing, which is a shirt that I just got for Justin Trawick and the Common Good, the current band for my musician and really good friend, Justin Trawick. So shout out to him for beginning of this review. But anyway, aside from that, let's get on to the review, which today's artist is a UK-based art rock band that is known for sort of pairing styles of indie rock, art rock, and post-punk with sort of samples of different historical radio broadcasts, sort of teaching about history through the music. With music, so they may not sing any words, but they still sort of create some sort of message with the music that they put out. And excuse for my croaky voice. I just have a cold right now. I'm feeling much better than I have, but as you can see, still have the cold. But still gonna just do this review. So I apologize if my voice doesn't sound the greatest in this review. And of course I'm talking about the band known as Public Service Broadcasting that formed sometime around 2011, something like that. They've released over three records, including this latest one, which dropped on July 7th, 2017. The album is called Every Valley, and as you can see, I have it on CD right here. This album is definitely one of the best art rock albums of the year, in my opinion. In fact, if you've watched my top 50 albums of 2017, this album made it onto the number 49 spot on my list. So it's lower on my list, but it definitely is a record that I highly recommend you check out. Really beautiful album cover, by the way. And this is a photo from the studio. This is the Beaufort Male Choir recording a performance for the last track on the record, which is called Take Me Home. This is a concept album about the mining community in South Wales. In fact, the band actually built a new recording studio around South Wales where they recorded the album. And of course, there's a little foreword from the band's frontman, Jay Wilgoose. And then it also lists stuff like the number of fatalities and disasters that have happened in the mines before. There's the liner notes. And this is a graph showing the coal production and employment and how it kind of went up here, but then kind of went down, pretty much. And this is on a indie label called Play It Again, Sam. And that's the CD packaging for Public Service Broadcasting's latest record, Every Valley. Excuse me. Anyway, this album, is... Anyway, sort of the thing I would have to say about concept albums is, there are pretty much two things that are, pretty important if you're going to make a concept album. One, don't be conceptual just so you can Like, don't be conceptual just for being conceptual, because I find sometimes if you try to be conceptual, you can kind of fall through the cracks and kind of get off the rails a little bit. So off the rails pretty much. But like in the case of Every Valley and like some of the other great concept albums that I've heard, this is an album that, while it is concept album sort of territory, it's one that does it with plenty of purpose and creates plenty of interesting sounds and very powerful messages to make it a very compelling, memorable experience throughout. Now, this is kind of a dreary sort of record, considering it does address the mining community, which does have a lot of like kind of melancholy to it, and definitely kind of plenty of melancholy and darkness to it, with only a few moments on here that seem to be sort of a sense of optimism. But they sort of illustrate those sort of emotions through some very grand and very wide-ranging instrumentation and whatnot. Like, take a look at the title track, Every Valley, which opens up the record, which opens up with this beautiful string embellishment before it's eventually punctuated by guitars, vibraphone, and drums and keyboards too, and with the first, and this features some samples from a documentary of the same name called Every Valley, which different excerpts from the documentary are like sampled throughout the album, and this is one of those songs, and sort of showing the miners sort of taking pride in how every wise ambition in their valley was to be a miner. Which right after that quote, we get this just beautiful jubilee of instrumentation that slowly builds. We get these huge horns that has some really awesome like French horn blasts in there. Blasts on there, and some very triumphant trumpets in there too, and definitely has a very unique melody to it. And I love the way that the strings sort of play along with the melody of the guitar, the guitar. So it's definitely really cool how for the first time they're incorporating more orchestral instrumentation. But definitely doing it so well. Well, and then after this we have the kind of dark and industrial flavored track, The Pit, sort of addressing how being in the pit and, in the mine, it can be like really kind of dangerous, and sort of detailing stuff like the temperature of coal reaches over 180 degrees. 180 degrees, so it makes sense that these kind of sort of unsettling things about coal, unsettling sort of facts about coal would be mentioned over some instrumentation, which includes some kind of brooding guitars, as well as some groaning trombones, which sound really nice on there, and also really cool sort of jazzy bass clarinet pops up in the mix too. Up in the mix too, and it definitely does show a sense of darkness, so it makes sense how in the liner notes they listed like the massive number of coal mining disasters that have happened over the years, where lots of people have died and stuff like that. And I love that part where it gets really cathartic, and some beautiful strings get introduced into the mix too. And then we have People Will Always Need Coal, which has kind of a tropical vibe to it, with the kind of percussive textures with the guitars and the wide variety of percussion instruments, including some really great bongo work on here. Great bongo work on here, and it opens up with a sample from a commercial, sort of saying how talking about how about coal mining will really make a lot of money and help you have a life full of like security and freedom and stuff like that. Sort of looking at it in a more kind of ironic sort of way, but it's not the kind of like absurdity that's gonna make you go, huh. But it is sort of a song kind of addressing mining in a more optimistic way, and sort of talking about how you'll always discover something new when you're down there. And when you're down there, and there's a lot of excitement and a lot of like good advantages that can come out of it. Come out of it, even if it is a pretty kind of dark sort of experience, as illustrated in the beautiful, mournful cello stylings that occur like in the bridge of the track. And I love that part at the end where we get these like peppy synthesizers and very cool sort of military inspired drumming and stuff like that. It gives it, this is probably one of the danciest tracks on the entire record, but it just sounds so cool. So cool, and it's definitely one of the most kind of joyful parts of the entire record. Following this, we have the first single, Progress, which features a very nice lead vocal performance from Tracyanne Campbell. Just a simple little line, but love the melody, but I love the vocal melody on this track. Progress! Like, it's definitely very catchy over some very kind of spacey guitars and keyboards, and the bass and the drums definitely syncopate nicely into a little rhythm section. Definitely one of the catchiest, probably one of the most straight ahead sort of pop tunes on the entire LP. And the samples on here sort of address how they're constantly coming up with new inventions and reconstructing and developing and addressing how machines will do all the heavy work and men will supervise them. And also really cool kind of weirder elements on the track too, like the vocoder sounds really nice, as well as some very inviting saxophone that comes in at the end as well. And it's definitely one of the most kind of like cathartic moments on the entire LP. The song Go to the Road, which is a much more sort of depressing track in comparison, features this really cool, unique, brooding bass line, and the guitar does fit over nicely with that as well. And while the instrumentation, like the drums and the synths sound really nice, and while I do like sort of the message that the track is trying to evoke, I will admit that this is the one track that this is the one track where I feel like after a while the melody that plays throughout the song can get a little old in my opinion, even though I do like the closing melody at the end of the track quite a bit, just a little more repetitive than I would have liked. But even though it does end in a pretty satisfying way with the sample of the Union have accepted it, the Party have accepted it, like we've reached the end of the road. So there's a little bit of sort of political angle to this record, but not like so overtly political or anything like that. But even more of these sort of themes are addressed in the song "All Out," which is like the heaviest, loudest song on the entire album. Guitars that are just like with these this kind of searing guitars and fuzzed out bass and kind of angry keyboards and booming drums. But it really does a good job of sort of evoking sort of the anger everyone felt of not feeling like they are taken care of. But there's a sample at the beginning of the song of like angry protesters and stuff like that. And we get a sample of a man saying how nobody's really getting taken care of. Like when people get sick, there's not enough nurses around and stuff like that. And also we do have a really cool mournful cello melody that fits in well with the guitar. Kind of gets sad at one point before it jumps right back into the kind of storm of anger and a girl, and then there's a woman revealing at the end, like at the end, pretty much why she's like so angry at what's going on. Then we have the song "Turn No More," which features a very powerful vocal performance from James Dean Bradfield from the English post-punk outfit, the Manic Street Preachers, and he sings this like poem that's about like his hometown of Gwent. Town of Gwent. Gwent. So like that's the name of so like "Turn No More" is like the name of a poem written by Idris Davies, adapted from the poem "Gualia Deserta," and used with kind permission of Gomer Press. And these lyrics, this poem really does sort of work really well as sort of tying the whole record together about its like message. And also I love James Dean's vocal performance, and has a little bit of kind of a like Viking song kind of vibe to it, but nothing like overly cheesy or conceptual, but definitely a very important message that this poem evokes. One of folks that also do like sort of the wah-wah guitar effects and effects, as well as that kind of, as well as the brooding piano. Really interesting, intricate drums and bass section on here. And I also love that part at the end where his voice is like stacked up 11 times, so it sounds like 11 people are singing this ending verse, which does sound really catchy, with him in the background adding some really cool sort of echoey like backup vocals. So it's definitely a cool little effect pretty much at the end. The song "They Gave Me a Lamp" is sort of again one of the more optimistic moments of the entire album, about like sort of women sort of standing up for themselves and they're feeling proud of the things they've done, like treating people with respect and trying to help out other people when they were having problems, considering the whole mining and employment thing was sort of like going down the rabbit hole. And really gorgeous instrumentation on here. The glockenspiel, acoustic guitars, the variety of hand percussion, some accordion on there, which sounds really nice. Nice on there, and Haiku Salut doing some like stacked harmony vocals over that, as well as adding the accordion and percussion parts to the track. track, and then eventually it builds up, and we get like these kind of urgent drums, as well as these like incredible horns that come in, and like that ending part is definitely one part that I just can't help but admire and like smile at, because it's just so beautiful and cathartic. It's definitely one of the best moments on the entire album. The song "You and Me" is a duet between Lisa Jean Brown, who sings in like some native Welsh language here, and Jay Wilgoose, the first time he's ever sung any vocals on a public service broadcasting LP. But the two voices just went so well together. Her beautiful, I am like very partial to Lisa Jean's beautiful voice and interesting, intricate, intricate articulation with her native Welsh language here. It's stuff that I'll never be able to pronounce, I don't think, but something that I will just that I just think is so damn beautiful to listen to. And then we have Jay Wilgoose singing in English, which his voice definitely has nice compliment over for her voice. It's definitely one of the most kind of ambitious songs in their catalog. There's no radio samples or anything like that, but it's definitely one of the highlights of this album, and in my opinion, probably the best track on the record. Very beautiful, if pretty simple, straightforward instrumentation. That guitar solo in the middle is just so beautiful and has a nice bit of a jazzy feel to it with the drums, which the drums are driven mostly by like a snare and a kick, but they do sound really nice on there over the beautiful jazzy guitar solo. And then we get this awesome orchestral backdrop, which slowly sort of blooms towards the end, to the point where it comes in, and it's just so beautiful. Like it's sort of like the ending of like a really good movie or something like that. That's how awesome the strings and brass sound at the end. And all their voices, and both their voices collide together, just hitting you in the feels, and it's definitely an incredible moment on the entire album. Yeah, it's probably the least brooding track on the entire album, but it's definitely one of the few tracks that without it, this album would be missing its sort of much needed breath of fresh air from all the melancholy, which it does dive right back into with the next track, Mother of the Village, sort of likening the mind to sort of the mother of the village, which is like South Wales, and which unfortunately now is sort of closing down because all the money they've lost and sort of not being able to employ enough people. So it's definitely one of the saddest tracks on the entire album. Because we have miners sort of saying how we thought we'd be there for the rest of our lives, but of course, unfortunately, nothing's really going to be normal again, and because it's the end of an era. And then we have a sample from an interview with Christine Powell, and she sort of talks about how all these things is saying about what they're saying about the coal mining industry going down as sort of an advantage. What it really is that it's not romantic at all. It's true, and it's definitely very sad. Very beautiful melody on here with the instrumentation, the ethereal synths, and once again a very beautiful, intricate guitar melody on here. The bass line sounds really nice. Like the rhythm section, really all throughout this album, I think sounds really nice. and also the little touch of glockenspiel was definitely very pretty on there as well. Love the way they incorporated that instrument a little bit on that album, on this album. And then this album closes with the tearjerker of a closer called Take Me Home, which starts out with a sample from the Every Valley documentary, with a sample from the Every Valley documentary about how when the mining industry was like defunct, all the people that were in who were miners, lubbers and lonely alike, gathered around and sang out. So I'm like picturing them like around like a fire, around like a campfire or something like that, singing this. And then we get the Beaufort Male Choir, comprised of like former miners, really like singing their hearts out about, and sort of pleading that that they get taken back home because they don't feel like they have a home anymore, and home. And I love how powerful the convincing message on here of take me home, let me sing again. Like, it's definitely a message that definitely hits me right in the feels, and definitely is, like, almost moved me to tears. It was so beautiful, and hopefully it does the same thing to you when you listen to it. So yeah, Every Valley is definitely a very beautiful, very incredibly sad, but at the same time, definitely a very beautiful and cathartic and very intricately produced sort of record. Whether you've liked this band before, like whether you've listened to their music in the past or not, like this is my first time checking them out. I really don't think you need to really scope out into their older stuff to really appreciate what they do, because Every Valley is like by far pretty much kind of like their magnum opus at this point. So that's my review of Every Valley, the new album from Public Service Broadcasting. I'll see you for episode 186. And hope you all have a happy Valentine's Day this Wednesday.